Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. We have a great story to start our video today. I can never understand how a guy like this could ever think that acting in this manner could possibly benefit him, let alone being the right thing to do in the first place. Good for our OP on remaining professional and civil, yet being able to exact some sweet revenge at the end of it all. 2 incidents with a little Danny DeVito clone. A few years back, I worked at a hotel in Beckley, West Virginia. I'm not sure what the policy is now, but at the time, all this brand of hotels were completely smoke-free. The hotel I worked at charged $250 to the guest's credit card if we found any evidence supporting that they smoked in the room. Also, being in Beckley, West Virginia, travelers usually talk down to me just because I live here. Incident 1. I was standing at the guest services desk on a quiet, boring night of work when a short, fat, sweaty, balding man came in. He reminded me exactly of Danny DeVito in the movie Matilda, both in appearance and mannerisms. He asked for, demanded, a smoking room, to which I replied to him that we did not have. He yelled at me, cursed at me, called me names. I kept my cool and told him I'd be happy to direct him to the Super 8 down the road, which I knew would have smoking rooms. He huffed and puffed and finally ended up taking the room at our hotel after complaining about the price for such an awful area. He came down a while later and asked for a wake-up call, as he had to be up early for a meeting. I put it in for him, as he requested I did while he watched so I wouldn't F it up. Before he got back on the elevator, he turned to me and said, "I have a cleaner that's proven to take the smoke smell from a room. You can't stop me from smoking." He then wobbled onto the elevator and went to the room. He had called numerous times before the shift was over, complaining about the people above him. He was on the top floor. His AC was not working. He had to use the wall unit, not the unit on the window conditioner. His AC being too cold, turn the air off or change the temp, and lack of room service. We did not have a restaurant. Each time he was more and more rude, with more and more name-calling and cursing at me. Before I left at 11, I made sure to cancel his 6 a.m. wake-up call. By the way, what I typed here doesn't even begin to convey how awful he was to me. I like to think that I have tough skin and rarely get offended or hurt by things, but once I was on my way home, I actually cried a little. I've never been treated the way he treated me. I had to be back to work the next morning at 7 a.m. Around 9, the man came to the desk in a hurry, yelling and cursing to my coworker that the dumb, inbred hillbilly bee made him miss his meeting. I came to the front desk from the office in the back, and he glared at me and said, "Oh, you, I didn't see you there," stuck a cigarette in his mouth, lit it in the lobby, and walked out the door. Once he left, I had housekeeping check his room. We had plenty of evidence of him smoking in the room. Aside from the smell, there were ashes on the nightstand from where he missed flicking them into the cup that was filled with butts. The joy I got from charging him $250, especially when he called and tried to talk his way out of it to no avail, was pretty fulfilling. Incident 2. About a year later, I'd switched jobs to a nicer hotel. There was a giant snowstorm and all hotels within at least 80 miles were filled up. I know this because we had a call log that we had to complete on nights like this, and I called every single hotel. We still had 3 reserved arrivals, but no non-reserved rooms left to give. The lobby was full of people, most of whom I felt awful for since we could not provide them lodging from the storm, but it was out of my hands. 2 of the 3 arrivals came in at once, and we got them checked in. Next in line, the Danny DeVito clone. As he was giving my coworker hell for not being able to pull a room out of her butt for him to stay in, our last arrival called to cancel. Because of the weather, I was able to cancel it with no penalty. I walked to my computer right beside where the clone was standing, asked for the next family in line, a very nice young couple with 3 kids, 2 of which were twin newborns, and loudly, because of the noise in the lobby, let them know that we just had one last room open for them. They were so grateful, really on the verge of tears, and took the room. The clone marched over to me after the family went to their warm, cozy room while I had my head down doing some paperwork or something and started to yell. After a couple of seconds, I looked up at him, into his little beady mouse eyes. The recognition that filled them was instant. And getting to say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see you there," was amazing. He asked to speak to my manager, to which I then pointed to the MOD sign with my nameplate under it for the night and said, "That would be me. How can I help you?" In his eyes now, defeat. The little jerk waddled out to his car, and that was the last I saw of him. And our second story. Don't believe inhalers are needed? Have fun losing your job. So this is actually a story that my mom told me from when she was in 8th grade. Sorry for the length. She had this art teacher, we'll call her Mrs. X, who absolutely hated her. She was an older lady with only 1 year left before retirement. This will be important later. My mom had PE right before her art class, and she also had really bad asthma. She'd left her inhaler in her locker, and when she was let out late from gym, she decided to go straight to art, drop off her backpack, then asked to go grab her inhaler from her locker. Mrs. X, having hated my mom for some time, told her to wait until announcements were over, and then she could leave. She decided not to fight and go wait for announcements. My mom's friends were ticked, and they knew she had terrible asthma, so they were trying to convince her to just leave the classroom because Mrs. X didn't deserve her attention, being the witch she was. My mom said no and waited patiently until she was allowed to leave. Once the announcements were over, she went to Mrs. X asking if she could finally leave. Her response was, "Well, if you had enough oxygen to sit there and talk to your friends rather than listening, I don't think you need your inhaler." At this point, my mom's wheezing and had started to get a headache from not being able to breathe. But again, she listens to her teacher, not wanting to get further on her bad side, and waits for class to end before she can grab her inhaler. Her friends continue telling her to just leave since she isn't doing any work anyway, but she tells them to just wait, knowing full well how her body reacts to asthma attacks. At the end of class, her friends booked it with my mom's locker combination to grab her inhaler because my mom was in no shape to run. However, when they finally brought it to her, she couldn't take in enough air for the inhaler to be of any help. Her friends rushed her to the nurse's office, where they told her about Mrs. X and how my mom couldn't breathe. The nurse ended up having to call an ambulance. My mom was rushed to the hospital, admitted into the ICU, almost had to get intubated, and was there for 10 days. Her parents were furious, and my grandfather was ready to sue the entire state. The school, knowing that Mrs. X was only a year away from retirement and not wanting to take away the benefits she'd earned from staying, ended up striking a deal with my grandparents. My mom no longer had to take art, even though it was a required class for 8th grade, so she aided for the counselors that period. The school district was also in charge of paying for my mom's medical bills. My grandparents wanted her to lose her job, but agreed to the terms. But the story doesn't end there. My mom's brother, who was in the 7th grade at the time of the incident, had to take sculpting the next year with Mrs. X her last year. A few weeks into the class, my grandparents got a letter informing them that my uncle was failing art. When confronted, he told them that on the first day of school, he'd asked Mrs. X a question and she'd accused him of being disrespectful. As punishment, she made him sit in a room that branched off from the main classroom. Every day afterwards, she would falsely accuse him of something and force him to sit in that room where he couldn't get any work done, hence why he was failing. My grandmother called up the school district in a rage, telling them that the original agreement was now off because Mrs. X was unfairly taking out her rage on my uncle and that they were ready to sue. Because the school district never thought to get my grandparents to sign a contract saying they wouldn't sue, they were forced to fire Mrs. X, much to the delight of my mother. She never got the benefits from retirement. And our next story. Trim the hedges. As a teenager, my parents were divorced and money was an issue, so no allowance to do the things teenagers like to do. This also meant no car, no insurance. You get the idea. I watched some friends work minimum wage jobs and hated that idea, so instead I found a lawnmower and started mowing lawns. I lived in a middle-class neighborhood, so 5 to 6 lawns, $20 a pop a weekend would give you some nice spending cash in the 90s. One customer, a few streets away, asked me to trim his hedges for him. I didn't know how or have the tools, but he did. He showed me what he expected, and I made it happen. They looked great. He was so happy he gave me $100. In today's money, that's like $250. When I got home, I excited told my mom what happened. My mom, as wonderful as she was, misunderstood life in general. In her mind, if you fixed a car issue, suddenly you were the car expert and knew everything about cars. Same thing with cooking, computers, audio, video, and yard work. She proceeded to tell me to do the same for the bushes in front of our house. I tried to tell her I didn't have the tools and was only following his instructions. They weren't hedges, but she was adamant I do it, to the point she started screaming at me. What would any 16-year-old teenager do? go grab our replica samurai sword, sharp as all, and start to hack away at the bushes in front of our house. Now, my neighbors knew my mom had unrealistic expectations from previous events, but even this was odd. One of our neighbors came over asking me in a heavy southern accent, "Neighbor, what in the hell are you doing?" Me, "Cut someone's hedges and mom suddenly thinks I know how to trim bushes." Neighbor, "Ah, that again. You, want to borrow some powered clippers?" Me, "Nope, I'm steaming mad at the moment." Mom, hearing the neighbor, comes out and sees her bushes partially mangled. Mom, "What the hell are you doing?" Me, trimming the bushes as I proceeded to whack a few more. Mom, "I meant how you're supposed to." Me, "Sure, whack. With what tools? Whack. I trimmed someone's hedges. Whack. So I must be able to magically trim bushes? Whack." Mom looks befuddled as I continue to hack away using a replica samurai sword. Neighbor steps in, patting me on the back and says, "I think she got the message." And I turned to look at her with a shocked/befuddled look on her face. I took my shirt and cleaned the now dented blade and walked inside to go take a shower. I'd love to say this kind of behavior stopped, but it never did. She also never asked me to trim the bushes again. And our last story. HOA says we're violating single-family clause. They also want our pool removed and limit us to 2 cars. Me and my 2 sisters inherited this property from our grandparents. It was their rental property. We demolished and rebuilt everything from scratch for ourselves to use as the main home for our family. We built a pool and a sauna. We live here now. During construction, the HOA president visited me and told us that our design violates HOA's renovation guidelines. He also said that the pool and sauna are violations of the bylaws. I reminded him that we're not members of the HOA and have no interest in joining. In the last 6 months, we've received numerous letters from the HOA either compelling us to join or inform us of our infractions. They're either about the pool, about the fact that we have 3 cars, or that we're not a single family. Apparently, brothers and sisters are not family now, according to this HOA. We also received letters saying that if we join the HOA, the fees will be waived for the next 5 years. This last week, though, the president brought us a form showing that there has been 45 signatures by the neighbors saying our way of life and our non-compliance with the HOA bylaws has significantly devalued their properties and has caused them stress, and they would want us to become a member. The president says this is enough to get a court order requiring us to become a member. He says the neighbors will be willing to testify in court as well. He says to avoid the legal fees on both our parts, he's willing to give us the 5-year waiver of the fees. First, I have no intention of joining this HOA. They've proven themselves to be exactly the type of HOA to not want to be associated with. Second, they said that a court can order us to join a HOA. I'm 100% confident we're not a member. We had our lawyer check that out when we were dealing with the paperwork needed for the demolishing. My grandfather bought this place before this HOA existed, and he was the most anti-HOA person in the world. Now I see for good reason. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.